Hey, I'm not sure why I didn't hear anything there. Well, I guess we're live. Welcome, everyone. Today is, I think it's the 30th. Yep, Wednesday, March 30th, 2016. My name is Luke Thomas, and this is the Promotional Malpractice Live Chat. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Today, I don't think anyone's too confused about what we're going to talk about today. Jon Jones, as I talk to you now, is sitting in a jail cell in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I believe cell 26, as Mike Chiappetta wrote on Twitter. We are obviously going to get to every single nuance about that. So, in addition, there is more MMA news. Of course, UFC 198 is just around the corner, not too far away. And I know UFC 197 is first, of course. We'll get to that with the Jon Jones stuff. But UFC 198, not too far away. They had a press conference for it in Curitiba, Brazil yesterday. We have our own Guilherme Cruz who was down there. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And, of course, news and notes across the MMA world and really the sports world generally, anything you want to get to. Best place to do that, of course, is going to be on MMAfighting.com. There we are. And or Twitter. You can get at me on Twitter at SBN Luke Thomas. And then you can use the hashtag chat rappers. Excuse me, I just ate some oatmeal. So I'm trying to talk to you while also not letting the spittle carry the oats onto the screen and so forth. Okay, let's get this going. Yes, I know I'm live. All right. First question. Well, first question didn't even get a recommendation. Didn't someone ask this question last week? What do you expect out of Conor's demeanor, and could the lack of trash talk hinder the amount of hype for the UFC 200 main event? I believe we got to that last week. Didn't someone ask? Plug this computer in before it dies. Didn't someone ask about whether or not the trash talk will be different next time? And my general response was that one. I guess we'll see what happens when we get there. Let's not forget that. But perhaps more importantly, perhaps more importantly, even if it's not, particularly biting or derogatory in some kind of obvious way, that it will nevertheless, Conor talking about introspection and reinvention and getting things right, and maybe that's not as sexy as, saying he's going to ride into a favela and cut the heads off all the military age working males or whatever it was that he exactly said. I suppose that there's something to be said for that, but it's not like Conor is going to go quietly through a fight camp or a fight week buildup. It may not be exactly the same thing, maybe substantially less, but will nevertheless be enough to be pleasing to his fans. So I suppose anything's possible. Perhaps it will look quite different. We have to be prepared for that scenario, but the idea of Conor McGregor not articulating his worldview in some kind of capacity seems unusual or aberrant in some kind of way. All right. So here's the first real question. There are a lot of UFC fighters who draw the ire of fans for one reason or another. Luke Rockhold seems to be one of them. Articles about Rockhold are always met with negative reactions in the comment section. I mean, the comments are usually pretty negative no matter what. He's often referred to as too cocky. It's a bit surprising to see a phenomenal talent like Rockhold receive backlash over such trivial observations. Well, welcome to the internet. While there are some fans who show their support, the majority usually haven't been very approving of him, even after dethroning Weidman. Question: have you noticed this trend of animosity directed at Rockhold, or what might the source of it be, in your opinion? Well, I think partly you're overstating the case. Sounds to me like you're a fan, and therefore you find the things that are said about him unpleasant in some capacity, which is fine. Everyone's allowed to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's true he hasn't won fans over yet quite in the same kind of way, in the loving way that Anderson Silva did. Anderson Silva was a bit of a bizarre character and obviously went on a long streak of dominance. I think there's been people expect great things out of Luke Rockhold, certainly, but I think there's been a bit of surprise to his dominance to some extent, or at least surprise to his success. He hasn't quite, he just won the title. He hasn't even defended it yet. So he hasn't, dominance might be a strong word, but you get the idea. These things take time. It takes time. Here's Barbas. It takes time to build a brand. It takes time to create an identity fans find palatable. And And look, he does say a lot of things that are typically associated with someone being what you notice, cocky, and people are like, well, no one ever calls McGregor out on it. Well, it's not quite true. Like, people do call McGregor out on it a little bit. It's just that he is a much more gifted orator. He marries these disparaging things he says, or these very complimentary things he says about himself, with other arguments or other things that make the whole package a lot easier to take. Luke Rockhold doesn't quite do that. He's much more, he gives these sort of like relatively benign, straightforward interviews, and then slips in these comments. And I think that can sometimes rub people the wrong way, but I don't know that he gets it any worse than anyone else, to be honest. I don't know that I've noticed a particular backlash to him. I think most people like him. I just don't feel like he's turned the corner into someone who really curries a significant amount of fan favor. And as a consequence, any kind of, and also Weidman has fans. Well, the guys he beats have fans. So no, I don't think he's a particular kind of target in that way. And what things he does do that make him a target are a function of the lack of turning that promotional and frankly, the meritocratic corner. Luke, talking about Nate Diaz. There have been a number of noticeable contradictions in the behavior of Nate Diaz ever since his win at UFC 196, for example. It is well known that Nate isn't particularly fond of doing media appearances, yet he was very adamant about getting more of a promotional push after defeating McGregor. In several interviews, he typically appears to be very uncomfortable and disinterested. But at other times, there are moments when he looks genuinely happy to be there. Nate has also walked out on interviews in the past after getting annoyed by the questions he was asked. Have you noticed these contradictions in Nate's behavior, and how would you best explain them? Well, he is many, he contains multitudes. There's a few ways to like parse some of this question. And number one, he doesn't like doing media. That's not quite true. I think he likes it sometimes. I think sometimes he feels like it's a bit boring or uninteresting or whatever his particular complaint might be that day, which is fine. He's certainly entitled to that opinion, and in fact, he might be right on occasion. When we had him on MMA Uncensored, I remember, he was one thing. This is years ago. This is 4 years ago. He was one thing when the cameras were off, and then when the camera came on, I'm not saying he was being dishonest. I just think some guys react differently when the red light comes on. And he was one of them. And I also think he's been with his brother. The silence kind of influences each other a little bit there. But suffice to say, there's all kinds of ways to get a promotional push, not least of which is, you saw McGregor and Aldo and a number of different commercials and whatnot. And that only comes with the being in these bigger fights. And you could say, well, he should have done X, Y, and Z to be in bigger fights. Nate has been problematic for the UFC insofar as we talk all the time about the UFC being really rigid and disciplined, and not in a bad way, in a normal, quite understandable way, about the hierarchy and these weight divisional model. And Nate doesn't really, his talents are not maximized necessarily in that linear path through the title. He is very capable of beating elite fighters, but he's not necessarily that guy who can rise to the ranks and hold a belt for quite some time. But he might be able to beat a guy who could. And so he, to me, it's very instructive that he, trains at a boxing gym, MMA gym too, trains at has a boxing trainer. He also and his brother have this boxing sensibility about matchmaking. And I feel like he feels like, I've been put into this system that doesn't make use of my resources and my value. And so the UFC hasn't been using him. It's not just, it's not in the UFC's interest to use him improperly. They just probably felt like, well, we should try to put him through this normal system. I think what the UFC is sort of coming around to, it seems like, is that there are guys who don't fit their model in particular. And as a consequence, if you make some adjustments to it, Cyborg being one of them, right, that you can still get value out of them, and they can get value out of the experience, and everyone really wins. Now, you don't want to do that to such an extent that it undoes the fabric of the promotional model or the divisional model, the weight divisional model. But I don't think that Nate is really threatening that in any kind of existential way. So to answer your question, I think he thinks if were I promoted in a way that made much more sense for my ability, I would have been in these big commercials. I would have been on these fight posters. I would have been on, purchased advertising assets. And as a consequence, there would have been more earned media opportunities. think that's kind of what he's saying. And you know, look, he might not like doing interviews in the same way that Conor McGregor might like doing them, but I think he's speaking to a larger question of how have I been used historically? Has that made sense for the promotion? Has it made sense for me? Has it made sense for fans? And I think he would probably answer no to at least a few of those. And as a consequence, you then begin to inventory what has been missed. And what has been missed is the both paid and earned media that come with those bigger opportunities. All right, fantasy matchups. Y'all love these. I am not sure why. Again, I always reserve the right to change my mind before the fight. TRT Vitor versus Rumble Johnson. Come on, Rumble. Jacare versus Bader. Even with TRT Vitor. Jacare versus Bader. Jacare, I guess, although Bader's really big. Magny versus Woodley. Man, I have been wrong about Magny so often. Tough, especially if it's a 3 versus a 5-round fight. I'll say Magny in a 5, Woodley in a 3. Lombard versus Gastelum. If Lombard can get back to the old Lombard a little bit, I would say him. If not, Gastelum. Askren versus Palhares, I would say Askren. Bendo versus Maya. Probably Maya. Dillashaw versus Mighty Mouse. Oof, that's a tough one. I will say Dillashaw, but that's tough. Marlon Moraes versus Thomas Almeida. I would go Almeida. Edson Barboza versus Joseph Duffy. Another tough one. Wow. I was going to say Barboza until Duffy fixes some things. And someone says TRT Vitor already beat Rumble Johnson a while ago. I don't know that he would do that again. Max Holloway and Mendez. What is next for them? That's a tough question. Well, Mendez certainly has some work to do to get back to where he is. As for Max, as you note, on an 8-fight win streak, I'm telling you, man, he needs a rematch between him and McGregor. I would be all in favor of. He needs to fight one of those upper-tier guys. Now, whether he fights Mendez, I don't know, but he needs to fight one of those upper-tier guys. After that win over Cub Swanson, who did he fight in his last fight? I can't even remember now. All away. I was spelling mixed up between Holloway and Dolloway because I think they spell it differently. Not just the first few letters, of course. I meant the away part. Yeah, he beat Jeremy Stevens. I mean, his last 4 wins, Cole Miller, Cub Swanson, Charles Oliveira, neck injury, and Jeremy Stevens. Now, the Stevens win was a little bit, not lackluster exactly, but not action-packed. But, you know, he's 15-3. He hasn't lost since Conor McGregor in 2013 in August, so almost 3 years, 2.5 years. I definitely feel like let's look at the contenders, who's available up there. I would say, what's up? A Lamas fight might be interesting. Yeah, Lamas. That'd be kind of fun. And then after that, you've got to give them the top contenders. All right. I'm going to skip one of these so we can come back to it. Jon Jones, what are your thoughts on this current Jon Jones situation? I find his reaction understandable if he wasn't drag racing, and how come the police only released a video of his reaction and not the actual drag racing? Boy, these are really interesting questions, aren't they? So let's talk about this. This is the big issue this week in mixed martial arts. Last week it was MMA getting legalized, and now in New York, and now it is this. What do you say about Jon Jones, man? Just, okay. There's so many different elements to this. The first one is there's been a lot of discussion about how he talked to the cop. I don't recommend the way he talked to the cop. I don't think that was in his best interest to do that. However, it should be noted there was nothing he did about that was illegal. Inadvisable, completely inadvisable. But just for the record, it's nothing you're not able to do. It is entirely within the realm of First Amendment privileges. Okay, so there's that. So when you think about that, you can say, what is this really about? Is it really how I talked about the cop? You know, in a way it could be, which I'll come back to in a second. But really, to me, the more salient issue here is the guy's risk management is unbelievably, spectacularly bad. He is just so wildly irresponsible. It is there's just no debate about it, really, unfortunately. Um, and to an extent that makes sense. This is a guy who makes his living fighting guys in a cage. This is a guy who makes his living fighting guys in a cage who will often abandon a more straightforward, not risk averse, but taking risk seriously game plan in order to beat guys in certain ways, beat them on their own terms. This is a guy who has fought guys without much training and won. Now, sometimes barely, but he's done it. To me, there is a common thread here about this guy not knowing how to manage risk, in part because he's never had to pay for a lack of risk management. There is something tying the way in which he fights to the way in which he lives. In terms of, not training properly for Alexander Gustafsson and trying to beat Daniel Cormier, for example, with wrestling to send a message, even though that, cost him maybe a round, or, the kind of, could he have stopped Daniel Cormier had he taken a different approach, which I think very likely he could have, at least in that first fight. We'll see what happens if that fight happens at UFC 197. But generally speaking, his ability to manage risk, the idea of taking risk seriously, is just not something, at least outside the cage, and I'd argue both, but certainly outside the cage, he does very well. We talk about he's so talented inside the cage and so talented out. To me, there's a common thread of just not taking risk very seriously. You can say what you want about the laws in Albuquerque, about, to what extent is revving an engine. And I read through some of them, actually, some of the local ordinances there. And it clearly says, adjusting your muffler to make it louder, by the way, is illegal, which I think apparently he's done. Revving your engine at any point or peeling out, but not one or the other, or both. It's not, you don't have to do both, but just vroom, vroom, making a loud noise is considered to be exhibition driving, which is part of drag racing in Albuquerque. He just does an incredibly poor job of understanding the world in which we live and his place in it. And that makes plenty of sense when you think about the fact that he's never, at least since he began fighting MMA, has never really had to pay for it. So to me, the big issue here is, first of all, how did he even keep his license? I don't even understand. I one time had a speeding ticket. I was over 30. Now that was a lot. So I was going 75 and a 45. I've talked about this before, I think. I was September 4th, 2011. So just 7 days before the world changed. And I was in uniform. And the judge, and I even told him I just need my car to go to show up for military duty. And he still was like, I'll take your license away for, I think it was like 3 months or 6 months, something like that. Had to surrender it before I left the courthouse. I didn't have representation and he did, but nevertheless, we're talking about DUIs, hit and runs, traffic tickets, speeding, casual speeding, and now engine revving. I mean, it's just a spectacular inability to manage risks, in particular behind the wheel of a car. One wonders if that is a skill problem or a neglect problem. Like, does he have the ability to do this in a way where he understands what needs to happen and just simply chooses not to? Or does he simply just not get that these are real requirements in life that you have to meet? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure any of us do who aren't close to him. Now, let me just say one thing about the Albuquerque police here just for a second. This in no way exonerates Jones. I want to make it very clear. I know everyone wants to say, oh, Luke, here goes Luke, exonerating Jon again. I'm not trying to do that. Whatever comes his way, including going to jail, if it comes to that, including losing this fight, if it comes to that, and I'm not saying I hope that it does. I'm just saying it's a realistic possibility that we have to take seriously. If it comes to that, Jon Jones has no one to blame but himself, period. End of discussion. There's just no argument about it. However, I was debating a good friend, I like him very much, Steve Cofield, or at least we're going back and forth on Twitter, and everyone was like, Jon, Jon's a menace on the road, and I would certainly agree that he is. I don't know why he kept his license. Even if he was allowed to keep his license, his handler should have been like, dude, you are not doing this anymore. However, if you don't think that the Albuquerque PD are petty and vindictive, I'm really not sure what to tell you. We are talking about a police force that has been documented by the Department of Justice to be one of the most corrupt in the country. They have been cited for innumerable problems, in particular related to the use or lack of of body cameras. Albuquerque PD began using body cameras in trial phases around August of 2010, and it picked up around in a full capacity around 2011 and 2012. They were cited in 2014 because they were using, I think, a brand of body cameras called Scorpion that were allowing police officers to delete what footage off that they didn't want. So think about that for a second. They were eventually sued for this, and they had to make changes. But they have also been routinely sued from advocacy organizations, from local news organizations for withholding any kind of footage from a body camera, not merely in cases related to assault or deaths, the shootings, in all number of different kind of scenarios. And they keep getting sued, and they keep fighting it in court and losing, which is a giant waste of taxpayer money. So here's the point about this. Now they are considered public record, but the point being is, what is the value of really releasing that information that you saw in that video where he loses his mind? Again, saying when you're on probation and doing completely inadvisable but not illegal things, what public safety record or what public safety interest does that serve? It doesn't serve anything other than to shame Jon Jones and to make life more difficult for him. Well, mission accomplished. It is both true that Jon Jones is wildly irresponsible and that there is plenty of evidence to suggest that the Albuquerque PD are glory hunters. You mean to tell me this is an organization that has, over time, for cases serious and petty, refused to release body camera footage, and they put this out to the media with a fairly unique quickness. For what purpose? It didn't serve any purpose. You could say, well, it showed us that Jon Jones was, he committed these crimes. Well, the simple citation of that fact would have served that purpose. The purpose of showing him on camera being mean to a police officer, and the police officer himself also having some issues there, but whatever. That was done to humiliate him. That was done to make life difficult for him. There's no other argument about it. This is a police organization that has skirted the rules related to body cameras over and over and over again, have released footage when they felt it would exonerate them, have hidden it when they felt, or kept it when they didn't want it to get to the public. These are all documented cases. This is a police force that has been documented by our own federal government at having an extraordinary rate of violence against its own citizens. The number of shootings in Albuquerque by police officers against its own citizenry, either resulting in deaths or injury, is 10 times the rate of what officers have to deal with in New York City. Think about that for a second. That is an insane number. So here's my point. Again, Jon Jones is, why is he driving a white Corvette, period? Why is he driving, period? I'll get to that in a second, too. There's just no argument in defense of that. None. Zero. It is also true that if you think that the Albuquerque PD are a bunch of aw shucks, Andy Griffith, Barney Fife types who are just out there to serve and protect the best they can, you're living in a delusional dream world. This is a police force that is all too happy it seems like, from my opinion, to make an example out of Jon Jones in any way that they can. In this particular case, they couldn't cite him for breaking a law absent the citation of the drag racing. They just want to have him on video losing his mind because that looks extraordinarily bad for him. And you can say, well, if you know that they have body cameras and Jones knew, he even asked in the video, why would you do that? Point taken. Dumb thing to do on Jon Jones's part. No defense of it. Nevertheless, the quickness with which that was released seems to me entirely intentional. And when you look at the utterly abject failure of that police department to be above board with policing generally, and in particular the use of body cameras historically, you need to ask some serious questions about their role in this whole thing as well. So that's all I'm going to say. Not saying that, again, I'm going to be very clear about this, not saying that in any way exonerates Jon. It doesn't. However, the idea that he alone is the only one doing questionable things here, not true. Now, the point about driving, and I made this point before, if you guys watch this chat or any of my podcasts or listen to my radio show or you know me generally, I talk about it to a point where you're probably sick of hearing it, but it has been a hugely instructive and valuable moment in my life to marry a woman from Latin America. When we go back to Colombia and Bogota, we never drive anywhere, in part because driving in South America is not something I recommend generally. But more than that, for roughly 10 to 15 bucks a day, you can hire someone who will just take you anywhere you want to go. If you want to go to the zoo in the morning, they'll take you there and they'll wait outside. If you want to go to a restaurant, they will take you there and wait outside. If you want to party till 3 in the morning, they will wait till 3 in the morning and they will take you home. This costs, again, about 10 bucks a day. Right. And you would say to yourself, why wouldn't you do that? Me and my wife split the cost. It's $5 each. $5 each to have a driver take us wherever we want. And this is usually a family friend. This is usually, and they'll drive your car for you. You don't have to ride in their car. They'll take money and deposit it in the bank, give you all the receipts. You can see how much money you gave them. Everything will be accounted for. They'll pick up your dry cleaning. Now, this is not a service that is available to you and me here in the United States because we're probably somewhere in the middle class range, maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below. For the majority of us, Jon Jones is the 1% in terms of the amount of money that he generates and earns. This is well within his ability to afford. Once he got in trouble for that hit and run, his decision to continue to get behind the wheel of a car is just galactically poor decision making. Wow. And to do so in a white Corvette in a town where the police will have discretion, it appears, over what they will and won't look for and what they will and won't release to the public when you are a celebrated, if controversial, African American male rich celebrity. Spectacularly poor risk management on the part of Jon Jones. You want to move to Albuquerque? You need to move to Albuquerque with the understanding this is what you are up against. And he didn't seem to think that was relevant enough to make the requisite changes. And, when he was on Ariel's show saying things like, well, when I drove, that one time I got pulled over, yes, I had a license and yes, I had registration. It wasn't in my car. I took it out of my car. Show of hands, whoever takes the registration out of their car or proof of insurance out of their car? I've never known anyone to ever do that, ever. You leave it in the glove box or somewhere in the dash in some capacity in the event that you have to produce it during a traffic stop. I don't understand that at all. Now, the license part I can understand if you took it out because you're going to the gym and it was in your bag, or that to me is less of a concern. But proof of insurance, registration, why would you carry that on your person ever? It's attached to the car. It has no relevancy to your life absent the use of the car, for the most part. So it just is unforgivable. And now he is at this point where he has managed to screw things up in such a damaging way that I am not wishing for this. I do not hope this upon him. I am in no way trying to be vindictive about this, but just speaking about the reality of his future. It is not inconceivable that jail time and a felony record is possible. That is stunning. That is stunning. Utterly stunning. What do you want me to say? I'm not saying you can't speak out against the Albuquerque Police Department in whatever way you see fit. I'm not saying that when you live in a community, you should have to accept, if you live in Flint, that you should drink the water. I'm not saying you can't fight back against those things or that you have to accept all causes. But if you're going to move to a community, there is some level of at least early adoption and early acceptance that comes with, this is the way things are. Now, I want to change them, but for the time being, finding a way to live within compliance is the top priority for my life. And he is unable to do that. And saying, well, I have to be perfect and I have to be perfect. It is probably true that there is a level of responsibility that he has to adopt that you and I don't. Now, again, if you're just driving around without your registration, I don't know what to say about that. There's just no defense of it. But okay, look, we're not going to be targeted by the police in our neighborhood. And I don't know that the police are targeting him either. But so they probably got their eye on him at least a little bit, right? Especially if you're in a white Corvette. But, we don't know what it's like to be a celebrity. You don't walk out of your home and the cops and your neighbors know everything about you. I mean, they might know who you are, but not because you're a celebrity in a public kind of way. You don't have a public life. Jon Jones has a public life, and he can't find a way to separate the two between that and his private life. But okay, there is a certain, I think it's fair to say there's a certain level of scrutiny that he has to go through that you and I don't. But he seemed to be under the impression that he was aware of this reality. If you are aware that the scrutinization of your life is beyond that of your peers or normal citizenry, then that also requires whatever acts you take to match that. If you're going to be in compliance, it doesn't matter if the compliance of your neighbor is different than yours. You need to act within it. And you can say, is there really a menace to the community when he's revving his engine at a stoplight? Probably not. But he has been caught for speeding, and he has been caught for DUI, and he has been caught for hit and run. And those are much more serious, of course. But the point being is, look, that's why they call it the straw breaking the camel's back. A straw will not break a camel's back, except if it's the 1 gajillionth straw that they finally lay on top. So saying to me, well, is drag racing really this public, or in the way which he's been cited for it? It wasn't even speeding. Is this some particular kind of menace? No, that in of itself is not. I mean, does that really bother you? It doesn't really bother me, that particular incident. But married to his larger record, it is just so outrageously, not ignorant exactly, but just negligent in such a dramatic capacity. So I am no friend of the Albuquerque PD, and I think the more you read about them, you'll come to that agreement as well. I'm sure there are good cops there. There are good cops everywhere. There are great cops, I'm sure, at Albuquerque PD who do well and everything by the book. And maybe this officer was or wasn't one of them. I can't speak to that in particular. But, it deserves to be noted that they are not little angels, right? These are not, we're just here to do our jobs. You're here to do your jobs in a way that makes you look good. That's what you're doing. Absent that, though, if you know that's what you're up against, if you know that's what you're dealing with, if that's what you've accepted to some degree by residing there before things have really fundamentally changed, then you have accepted that. To some extent, you have accepted that. And certainly if you want to have a career where you're a prize fighter, which requires you not being in jail and having these public headlines around you, what brand is going to want to be involved in the Jon Jones business going forward? Unbelievable opportunity cost here. Unbelievable. And remember after he got those tickets, the first ones, the ones in January, they were all eventually let go, where he didn't have his license and stuff. I mean, he does have a license. He did have registration. He just didn't have it on his person or in the vehicle. And those were all eventually wiped away. Remember he being like, he got on Instagram being like, they're talking about tickets. And I said MMA Beat, like, how can you think this? How can you be so glib about all of this? Well, it turns out he didn't take his responsibility seriously. And he didn't take maybe the additional responsibility that was placed on him because of his status as a celebrity and the increased scrutinization that comes with that very seriously. I am sure he's trying to do things well. I have heard from people at, close to Jackson's and people who have seen what's going on there that there is a difference in the way in which he lives. I mean, they can't be 100% sure at all times, but that there generally is enough evidence to indicate he's not partying like he used to, and he's not getting behind the wheel hammered. You notice he was quite sober when the cop pulled him over. And he is trying to live differently, and you can see it in his physique. Like, it's true that some changes were made, and all the credit to him for doing that. But those don't mean anything if you don't complete the full battery of changes that are required of you. And I don't know if it's too late for him or not. I really don't. The problem that with me even saying that is it's an open question. It's just so disappointing. It's just so disappointing because I've met him and I've talked to him on a number of occasions. I don't know him personally, but he seems, for the most part, believe it or not, I've really enjoyed talking to him. I think he's the greatest talent we've ever seen. And the next chapter, if there is one, is supposed to be even better than the last. And here we are on a Wednesday in March of 2016, and he is in a jail cell for probation violation. Is that not stunning? Wow. Someone's asking, why didn't the body camera capture the infraction? I'm not sure. It could be that he was at this kind of an angle or this kind of an angle, and he could see out this, or the body camera faces this way, and he was turning to his right, and so he could see it in ways that the camera couldn't. There have been problems with some of the early body camera work that and companies that police have done. They've cut off the field of vision, so you can't see what happens in tasering situations, for example. So I don't know why that wasn't released, although I'll say it, to me, would seem entirely reasonable to think. Here's what I would say. If someone told me they have footage of that too and decided not to air it, that would be not surprising at all. That's the kind of police department you're dealing with in Albuquerque. The idea that they would edit that out and release the bad stuff is in no way surprising. This is a police department, I'll say it again, that your own federal government cited as having stunning levels of ineptitude and corruption, and had their own issues related to body camera usage. Guys and officers deleting their own footage selectively before turning it in every night. So you noodle that for a second, and you tell me if Jon Jones was, they just found out he was doing all this bad stuff. Maybe. But I am completely unwilling to give the Albuquerque PD the benefit of the doubt. Has nothing to do with whether Jon Jones has managed risk properly, but nevertheless, if you want to think the Albuquerque PD are just some Boy Scouts down there, I've got mountains, and I do mean mountains of evidence to suggest that in every way policing matters and in every way transparency matters about public information, they are terrible at it. All right, Jon Jones versus top 5 heavyweights. If Jones beats and stays clear of this major legal issue and then beats DC, AJ, and Gus, a move to heavyweight seems next. How do you think he will do against the top 5 heavyweights? I think he would beat just about all of them, to be quite honest. I don't really mince words about that. Do you think the Jon Jones versus Cormier fight will continue to go on? How strong do you believe the chances are this fight gets pulled? So he looks like he's going to have a hearing tomorrow. I guess we'll see. Everyone who is with him seems to indicate that this will go forward as normal. I guess we'll have to, wait for that to happen. Not sure what else to say about it. I can't speak to, historical precedent in either law or in particular, New Mexico law about whether or not he will, be released for this. I hope. Again, I don't think the last act he was doing was some sort of, menace to the public. But, if he's out there thinking, well, there's one set of justice for you and there's one set of justice for me. Yeah, John. Yeah, there is. Because you're a celebrity, and you're a celebrity with frankly, I'm sorry to say this, a criminal record. One that you've managed to avoid the worst of heretofore. But yeah, there is definitely a different level of justice for you. If I get pulled over at a stoplight here in DC for revving my engine, not that I would. I drive a Mazda SUV. I don't drive a white Corvette. I could probably afford one. I would just get cited for whatever I got cited for, noise pollution or whatever they do. In DC, they don't pull you over for anything. They're so busy dealing with real crimes, they don't pull you over for that kind of garbage. But whatever. If I did, no, because I don't have a record. I don't have the authorities known in the community that I'm particularly a bit of a nuisance on the road. So yeah, there is a different level of justice. All right, styles make fights. Let's say Conor McGregor fought Nate Diaz at UFC 189 instead of Chad Mendez. Okay. Then Aldo would have never fought McGregor and would have never lost his featherweight championship. Not sure how that follows, but okay. Let's say Holly Holm fought Miesha Tate before fighting Ronda Rousey and lost. No one would have given her a chance against Ronda. No one gave her a chance against Ronda anyway. It's true that styles make fights. So do you think that there are some contenders being eliminated by other contenders and not being given a chance against the champion while their styles could really give the champion some problems? Yeah. So this is a common thing, right? Remember when it was like, I forget which fight it was, and they were vying for number 1 contender status, and they were like, let's have Carlos Condit fight Josh Koscheck. And this is before Josh Koscheck completely, fell off as an elite level fighter. And I was thinking to myself, are you out of your mind? Like, I don't think that Carlos Condit is a bad fighter. In fact, I think if it stayed standing, he would erase Josh Koscheck from the earth. But he's probably going to get wrestled to death a little bit. And I think it was going to be a 3-round fight the way they were pitching it, like a co-main or something like that. And I was like, and eventually they didn't do it, but I was like, why would you use one contender? And again, I think it was a contender at the time. Why would you use one contender to knock off the other? Now, here's the truth of the matter, though. There are some cases where it's kind of unavoidable. Like if you want a contender to contend for a title, they have to work their way through the queue. Well, that means beating other contenders. How else do you verify someone's talent? Now, some ways you can verify that by beating older guys, veterans who you can use in that kind of way. But suffice to say, consider Rory MacDonald versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Rory is very much still a contender. He's a little bit longer in the tooth despite his age, and he's got a few more miles on him than he used to. I think we can all agree with that. But generally speaking, he is still very much a contender. And now he's going to fight Stephen Thompson, and Thompson could get knocked off here a little bit, at least temporarily. That is partly the game you play in contendership building. You can avoid some of it by just beating guys who aren't in that space, but invariably you've got to beat guys in that space. The question is, when you do it, does it make sense for the division? Does it make sense for what fight you can ultimately sell if someone emerges as a top contender? You're going to make a title fight. If this person loses, would it be catastrophic for them, or is there a rebound potential? And you have to weigh all these different questions equally and in a way that makes sense. But it's difficult to do. Like, I don't envy the job of Joe Silva or Rich Chow, or especially Joe Silva and Sean Shelby. Bellator works on a much more looser model. It's not quite as difficult in that sense. I'm sure his job is difficult. I just mean in that particular way, having contenders fight one another. But they've got that coming up. Michael Chandler versus Josh Thompson. Now, if Thompson wins, it's not the end of the world. But what if Chandler loses? Lost twice to Will Brooks, and now you lost to Thompson. That would be bad for him. So they have to deal with it too. But yeah, it's tough. You have to really kind of ride out the situation and feel it. Like, what are the consequences that would happen here? What are the consequences that would happen there? Can we really afford to do that here? Can we not afford to do that there? So it's tough. It's really tough. Next UFC champion, not from the U.S. or Brazil. Currently, there's Joanna and Conor, but who do you think will be the next champion not from the U.S. or Brazil? Rory, Overeem, Habib, Romero, Whitaker, Bisping, Mousasi, GSP, Gustafsson, anyone else? Habib probably has the best chance in my judgment. I don't know if he's going to beat Ferguson or not. Ferguson's hot right now, but down the line, Habib seems a little bit hard to deny, right? How do you think Cyborg would do against Smith now with USADA drug testing? The fight is taking place in Brazil. Yeah, these questions about her are sort of ridiculous. She hasn't failed a drug test in years. If she was on stuff previously, she does not appear to be now. And even then, we're talking about Leslie Smith, who is Leslie Smith, and I mean this absolutely as a compliment, is a dog, man. She will just get in there irrespective of consequence and slug it out with you. I got a lot of respect for Leslie Smith, man, a ton. When I saw that, I was like, Leslie Smith took that fight against Cyborg. I was like, wow. And only because I've talked to her a few times. I can't remember the last time I spoke to her. I want to say it was at the Dynamite event. She was there with some of the Cesar Gracie guys. Nate Diaz was there briefly. I can't. Maybe it was there. Maybe it was somewhere else. I can't quite remember. But I remember talking to her, and I got the sense right away that she's obviously quite friendly and normal and a very sweet person. But she is a competitor through and through. Like, oh, is there a monstrous challenge awaiting me that I have very little chance in terms of the prevailing wisdom to win? That's the fight I'll take. To me, when she took that, I was like, I was only surprised in the sense of, it's a big weight jump. I know she competes at 135, is only 140, but generally she'd probably be a natural 125 if she could be. But then I guess I wasn't surprised because Smith is a war horse. Any word on BJ Penn's criminal charging issue? This is not one I've paid a lot of attention to, unfortunately. I admit it's probably a blind spot. I should pay attention to it more. I just haven't with all my other priorities. So I can't really give you any information. It's not something I've covered in any kind of way. Jeremy Botter might be better for something like this. Unfortunately, I'm not here to. I'm not very valuable in this regard, or maybe any regard, but in particular to this one. True or false? Fabricio Verdum, out of all UFC fighters, has the best chance to beat Jon Jones. Out of all of them, maybe not all of them. I wonder how Jones would match up against Mark Hunt. I guess he would take Mark Hunt down, but Mark Hunt's takedown defense is pretty good. Yeah, I guess Jones will find a way to get him down. Jones's weightlifting increased his punching power, probably a little bit. Conor McGregor opening as the favorite in the rematch against Diaz is ridiculous. It is in the sense that I don't favor his chance to win. It's not in the sense that the odds makers probably did that to generate interest in betting. Conor McGregor's chin wasn't as good as we thought. It's still pretty good, but it's got its limits. If Conor McGregor and Jon Jones were to fight on the same card, Conor McGregor would be in the main event. Depends entirely on who they're fighting. But probably. It's more true-false. Y'all love the true-false, boy. Keeping a straight face during Dada 5000's interviews was the hardest thing you ever did. That's funny. No, actually, for a good reason. I had a hard time keeping a straight face interviewing Kimbo. Now, not because I thought he was like a lying idiot or anything, but because he was funny. He was making me laugh. Y'all see the one where I asked him about no sex before fighting? That dude had me cracking up. Shogun can revive career with a move to 185. No. Leslie Smith lasts longer than 1 minute with Cyborg. True. I don't know how much longer, but true. Fedor ends up joining Bellator or the UFC. I'll say true because you said Bellator or the UFC. Velasquez won't challenge the heavyweight belt in 2016. So if he comes back at 200, let's say he beats Brown. I disagree. He might. Cyborg will lose by the end of 2017. Probably true. She's getting up. She's long in the tooth. How old is Cyborg? Old Cy Beezy. You hear my stomach growling? She's 30. Let me mute this so I can get some. Hang on 1 second, y'all. I apologize. I'll do this real quick. Sorry about that. Okay. Great question. Corner stoppages. Luke, it's pretty common for corners in boxing to throw in the towel when they feel like their fighter has taken enough punishment. I'd say it's more common, but I don't know how common it is. However, this is something I am yet to see in the UFC. Am I wrong, or are corners in MMA more willing to let a fight take its natural course rather than jumping in to stop needless punishment? I am astonished that in cases like in the Lombard fight, the corner not only did not try to stop the fight in the second round, but they allowed him to continue to the third. This is true, and this is not a problem with an obvious answer. And you may say, well, you should educate these guys to take less risks with their own fighters' health. And of course, I share your sentiment completely. Did you guys see the fight with Chris Eubanks Jr. and God, what was the other guy's name? Blackwell, I think, out in England. So the guy, Eubanks Jr. was just like crushing this guy, and his own dad, who was cornering him, was like, don't go to the head if you can, hit him to the body because the referee's not doing the job. So you have a poor referee and you have a poor corner in that particular case, forcing one fighter to try and hurt his opponent less because they won't do their job. That is astonishing to me. That is totally astonishing. But to your point, it does happen more often in boxing where, and you see more mercy stoppages in boxing. Like upsets happen in boxing, but 5-6 rounds in, hell, 4 or 5 rounds in, you can kind of tell if there's a difference in class between the two and how it's going to go. No, If they fought 100 times, maybe the guy who won 99 eventually would lose that 100th, and he would maybe lose in devastating KO fashion or something like that. But the point being is it's not all that common. And you get a general sense that if they can't beat these certain weapons and a certain defense that this guy has, this is just going to go poorly for them if this continues. Let's just save it for another day. In MMA, there is this, and you see it in jiu-jitsu all the time. I one time, for example, I advocated, I saw Paulo Miao at, this was like the 2014 Worlds, I want to say. Paulo Miao was in the finals, or the semis, and he beat some guy like 30-4. I mean, he was just taking the back, going to mount, taking the back, going to mount, knee on belly, taking the back, going to mount, you know, and he must have had like 7 or 8 advantages too. Something ridiculous, okay? And I'm like, why isn't there a tech fall in jiu-jitsu? And I put it on Twitter, like, just put a tech fall in there. This makes no sense. And people responded with something very similar. They said, well, like, you know, you can always catch that submission. Guys can make a mistake. And I'm like, this is true. You can always catch that submission. It is possible for that to happen. If you lost 30-4 in a 10-minute bout in jiu-jitsu, that bout should have, or match, whatever, should have never happened to begin with. And the reason why you want to add in a tech fall is in jiu-jitsu, it's less relevant for someone getting hurt than it would be in MMA, but certainly just for competitive sake, to keep the tournament moving in an efficient manner, to keep the matches flowing in an efficient manner. If there's a clear disparity in talent, you might be running over the infinitesimally small chance that the guy who was 4 points could eventually, you know, get someone's back and choke him out. You are running over that, but that's a cause worth running over, given how outsized the chances of that are of happening, or not happening, I should say. And for the tournament's sake, people have this belief that, like, oh, if I could just get a hold of his heel, if I could just get an arm drag, if I could just get to his back, if he makes a mistake, I could choke him out. And we could all list examples where that's happened. The fact of the matter is that it's extraordinarily rare. And in the case of something like this, where Lombard is taking literally an arithmetically measurable beating, it's inhumane. It's inhumane. It's irresponsible, and it's inhumane. And I know those guys who are his corner, they're not bad people. They're trying to give him every chance they have. Lombard had never been stopped before. That's also another a factor we have to consider here. But when it's going that bad, and he came back on the stool, sending him back out in that third, like, for example, I put the responsibility of what happened in the second not on the corner. I put it on the referee. But when he went back to the stool and they sent him back out for the third, that's when I was like, okay, well, that's on you now. That's on you now. So it was a mutual failing there to take his health seriously in the way that we should, all because people put their hope and stock in these utterly minute possibilities that we can't fundamentally say this will never happen, but it seems profoundly unlikely. And in the interim, the juice is not worth the squeeze here. It just simply is not. All right. Let's keep it going. Solving the Jon Jones problem. Let's see what you mean by that. Luke, would losing be the best thing for Jones? No. After Weidman lost to Rockhold, he immediately came out and said he felt like it was what he needed to improve as a fighter. That is a common thing they do after losing, and it does not necessarily correlate with future success. And he made the necessary changes. We'll see about that. Is it possible that if Jones suffers the first legitimate loss of his career, it will make him refocus on fighting and stop getting in trouble with the law? How big of a difference do you think a loss even to his rival at Cormier at 197 will make? Well, we'll see if he gets out of this jail tomorrow. I guess he has a hearing at 8 a.m. before a judge. Assuming that happens, I guess we'll see. Lots of guys lose, and they also think, oh, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. And in some ways it can be. Certainly you and I can think of circumstances where a loss would be humbling or illuminating. Anyone who's ever fought or competed in athletics will tell you losses are much more instructive than wins. So there's something to be said for that. But for me, I go back to this. Whatever else you want to say about Jon's personal life, in the cage, he is the greatest talent I've ever seen. And I don't know how you guys feel, but this is how I feel. I like to see talent actualized. I like to see talent be and greatness achieved. And I'm not saying a loss would preclude that necessarily, but if he can go the rest of his career undefeated and do it across 2 weight classes, To me, that would be something that would be so special that I wouldn't necessarily need a loss to. If the loss doesn't have to trigger it, then we don't need it, I guess is what I would say. Also, it is not in any way clear that what Rockhold is talking about is true. Excuse me, I'm sorry, not Rockhold, Weidman. Now, I had Weidman on my show, and I asked him about this. I said, look, if you think about the division generally right now, you've got Romero, who is on the shelf for right now. We'll see what happens with him, but he's on the shelf. But absent that, who really is as we speak today, an existential threat to Rockhold's title besides Weidman? Nobody that I can think of. I'm not saying other guys can't win, but seems unlikely, deeply unlikely. And so when you think about that, and you say, if I'm Weidman, I just lost badly. Why not take a tune-up fight? His response was that he had what's called a Jones fracture in his fifth metatarsal, which takes forever to heal. He told me his fifth metatarsal, his outside toe, I believe it's his outside toe, was so broken that 3 weeks after the fight, it was still broken. So he broke it 6 weeks before the fight, and it was still broken 3 weeks after the fight was over. Consider that for a moment. That is crazy. Okay. But to the point, it's not always clear. A lot of guys always say, well, it was the best thing for me. And sometimes it was. Sometimes it's a learning experience where they recalibrate things. Sometimes it's just they're only telling themselves that because they need to. Remember, fighters, and when I say lying in just a second, I am not calling them dishonest people to you or to me. But no successful fighter is honest to themselves. Every successful fighter is, in their brain, the biggest liar on the planet. No, you're not tired. Keep going. Nah, you're not hurt. Keep going. You can do this. Keep going. Even when real world consequences come crashing down on them. This is not real. You can do this. They are often, not always, quite poor judges of the truth because they have to believe the version of it that caters to their hopes and dreams. So always remember that when fighters talk out loud about how their self-assessment. I'm not saying that he's wrong. Maybe what Weidman said is, I know I can beat this guy, but I had broken this and I couldn't wrestle and I couldn't run. And maybe Weidman goes in there next time and beats the brakes off of him. I certainly, if they both go in healthy, I certainly expect a much more competitive fight. But absent that, or I should say, if that doesn't happen, I also would not be surprised at all, especially with the quick turnaround. Luke Rockhold's comments on wearing Adidas over Reebok. Outside the cage during an interview with Jonathan Schrager, Rockhold said, quote, "I don't care. Like I said, I didn't sign a contract with Reebok. I signed a contract with Adidas before. Who knows how long this Reebok deal will last? Your thoughts?" I'm not sure what the question is. Let me hear it. At the 14:29 mark.
But don't forget, if you fancy a bet,
let's see.
Link below, you can register Autumn.
I don't care. I don't care. I didn't sign a contract with Reebok. I signed a contract with Adidas before this deal was made, and I endorse my product I back, and what I believe in, and that's Adidas. And who knows? Who knows how long this Reebok deal will last?
Sounds to me like he says, I get paid no matter what. I rep Adidas to the extent possible outside of these requirements by the UFC. I wear it because I have to. And obviously he's referring to the fact that there has been, think about this. The Reebok deal hasn't even been official for a year yet. And you just think about all the strife and animosity that has happened. I suspect the deal will reach completion, but I don't know what it will look like if there's another one after the fact. I will also say, boy, if the pressure is on to get the next set of kits right, whoa. With the 5 best guys in UFC history, 5 most talented fighters regardless of weight class. Jon Jones. Someone's got Jon Jones, Silva, Nurmagomedov, Demetrius Johnson, Daniel Cormier. I would say Jones, Silva, BJ for a time, maybe. And That last one's really tough. Someone's got Demetrius Johnson. You could add in there maybe Ronda. That's tough. That's really, I don't know. Did you intentionally rhyme? It's 2:15. Let's go to the Twitter machine. I did not. Silva has interest in catchweight versus McGregor. Is this a freak show, and would it be viewed the same as Risen? Yeah, it's freak showish. I mean, look, two things about this. Number one, Anderson Silva is a weird guy. Number two, he's a good guy, but he's a weird guy. Number two, he's also notorious about the desire to have these weird competitive moments and opportunities. So there's that. And then three, he never got that super fight with GSP. He's probably still itching for one. And Conor McGregor's like, I can go to welterweight. And Silva's probably saying to himself, I could go to welterweight, but it just, that seems so far-fetched that, I mean, I know Conor McGregor has certainly stretched our imaginations in ways other fighters have not. And even though he had to go back to earth a little bit with the Diaz loss, I don't think it's gone forever. But generally speaking, I would say that seems, calling that remote seems quite charitable. So I was asking about top prospects. Let me tell you about that. I do a radio show 3 times a week. I do this chat. When there are fights, I do the Monday Morning Analyst. I do the MMA Beat. And I'm trying to work on some other articles, believe it or not, that I still haven't quite finished. As a consequence, I just have not been able to look at the next crop of fighters in a way that I used to or would want to generally. So unfortunately, this is not one I can speak to very clearly. I don't know who the top prospects are anymore. That used to be a source of pride for me. But I believe that if you want to look at that, someone like Patrick Wyman would be really good for that. I believe he's done some work on that for Bleacher Report. So give his work a look. This is something he devotes a lot more attention to and has obviously developed a lot more expertise about and knows the current crop. So give his stuff a look. Biggest draw. Luke, last week on the Beat, you said that Jon Jones was the biggest draw, even though he has never drawn more than 800,000. Did you mean he has the potential to be, or what were you referring to? I'd have to go back and hear what the tape was, but I think we were asking who were the biggest draws in the UFC as potential headliners. And at the moment, if you discount Ronda, who are they? McGregor, you could do McGregor Diaz, but who else would be out there? Jon Jones. Velasquez is not what he once was. Who else would be out there that you could think of that would be a big one? Miesha Tate. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure she can draw okay. Maybe not even her. Who would it be? Vitor? Maybe. It's not really abundantly clear, is it? So when you narrow the field, Jones becomes part of that. But I don't know exactly how I said it, so I'll have to go back and look. But I don't know how that's debatable, that argument I'm making there. Jon Jones is clearly one of the bigger stars in the UFC, and 800,000 is, trust me, nothing to sneeze at. You're getting accustomed to these 1 million Ronda, 1 million Conor. That won't last. Trust me. I mean, I'm glad it's here. It's great for you. It's great for me. It's great for them. It's great for UFC. It's great for the sport. I'm not mad about it at all, but that won't last. You put Kevin Gastelum. It's Kelvin Gastelum. At just 24 years of age, his last 3 gritty performances were against Ellenberger, Woodley, and Magny, which could have resulted in a 3-fight winning streak. Do you believe we'll be looking at a future champion, especially since he fights out of AKA, could potentially move to AKA? I don't know. I think he has the ability to beat very top guys. I don't know if he's championship caliber. Now, when I say I don't know, I am not saying he is not. I am saying I don't know if he's championship caliber. Heretofore, the upper bound limits he's been tested against indicate that's probably not true, that he's probably not that way. But to your point, at 24, and given the rapid improvements he's already made, it's not something we can discount. So I would say the odds are probably not, but stranger things have happened. If you could choose, what would you like to do with Jon Jones? Have a drink with him, do a bump with him, smoke a joint with him, take a car ride with him? Barbas. Stop. Sit. All right, you want to be on camera? You camera whore. There's Barbas being terrible. Well, I wouldn't want to affect his sobriety, so I would not have a drink. I would not do a bump. I would not smoke a joint. You said take a car ride with him. You didn't say he was driving. So I would drive, and I would show him. I would say, like I'm looking at Barbas, I would say, John, you see when I drive, I'm not saying John is Barbas. I'm just saying as an example. You see, if I drive, you don't have to worry about it. And if we get pulled over, you won't be cited for anything. I'll be responsible for the car. I'll be responsible for the license and the registration and everything else. And you wouldn't have to worry about it. And John would be like, that sounds like a good idea. Ready for this? Manos arriba. All right. Go down. I watched the video and I find it incredibly hard to believe the officer in this case, talking about Jon Jones, he is given 5 tickets, including drag racing, but not a single one for speeding. Seems like the cop clearly has something against him to start. Well, he said it after the fact. The feeling is mutual. Also, why did they release the video and not a dash cam video as well, showing what he was accused of? The officer clearly seemed like he was targeting Jones, maybe for obvious reasons, but seriously, your thoughts? Again, I've already sort of talked about this. By the way, the guy who drives us around in Colombia is a really great guy. His name is Guillo, short for Guillermo, however you want to pronounce the double L/Y in Spanish. And Guillo takes us everywhere. Like I know we're going to go later this summer. Who's going to pick us up from the airport? Guillo. Henan Barao, what are your thoughts on Barao and how do you rate his chances in a new weight class? Well, we'll see how he looks at 145. I don't think he's going to be the biggest 145er. And against Jeremy Stevens, who is a monster power puncher, I don't know. I'll say this, man. If you're asking me, do I have concerns that the prolonged amount of weight cutting he's done and the difficulties he's had with it, including the tremendous beatings that he's been given at the hands of TJ Dillashaw, have those lessened him as a fighter? I'm not saying, again, we can't declare that until we see more evidence, but I certainly have concerns about that. Yeah, absolutely. Those were career-altering beatings that TJ Dillashaw gave him. And when you combine that with some of the real difficulties he's had in making that weight class, certainly going to 145 is a better choice for his health in that sense, but I don't know if he's going to be the same guy. I really don't. The most complete female fighter in the UFC. Now that Cyborg is making her debut and the 135 title has switched hands from Rousey to Holm to Tate, who would you say is the most complete mixed martial artist out of both the 115 and 135 division? Wow. Kadelia is probably the most complete. She can wrestle, she does jiu-jitsu, and she can strike. UFC 200 dream card. I don't know. Please do a breakdown of Paige Van Zandt's dancing. I thought she looked amazing, and I hope this has a huge impact on her career. Your thoughts? Yeah. And everyone was like, well, it's a lot of older people who watch that. First of all, it's a lot of women who watch that. It is a lot of older people. It's roughly 12 to 15 million a week who watch that. And more to the point, this kind of thing in terms of exposure, you don't think television producers and movie executives are going to see something like this and think, there might be something there. It's not about is Granny at home watching. It's what other swath of the mainstream, including influencers, are also seeing that or have access to it and are going to see her out there shining. Did y'all see her on Latin Night? Golly, boy. Look, no one's going to ask me my opinion on dancing absent this chat, and I thought she looked unbelievable. I talked to my sister. My sister's in her 40s, and I was like, did you see that female fighter who was dancing with the Stars? And she was like, that girl clearly has a dancing background. So she knew nothing about her. And, other than here's a fighter and she's in the UFC, watch this. And she was like blown away by her. Yeah, dude, if Paige Van Zandt, this is so different than Chuck Liddell doing it. If Chuck Liddell, he was retired, it didn't mean anything. If at 21, 22, however old Paige Van Zandt is, she goes in there and she wins Dancing with the Stars, I'm telling you, man, that is big, big doings for her. And then you got Geraldo Rivera looking just like, Geraldo Rivera, literally all they had to have to tell him is, all right, Geraldo, put these ratty clothes on. But when you get up in the morning, just don't do anything. Just come natural to the studio. You're going to be an extra in The Walking Dead. Yep, you're going to be one of these zombies. And we'll just get you to do that. I mean, the way he walks is the same. I mean, I don't know what this dude is thinking I was like, why aren't you doing the Thriller video dance? Admittedly, it requires some, dexterity, but it already fits in with his, his geriatric hustle. Jon Jones shown the door. Luke, at what stage, if ever, will the UFC just wash their hands of Jon Jones and say enough is enough? Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon. It would have to get significantly worse for them to cut him. More to the point, people ask, what about this Reebok deal? What would it take for, one party to kill the deal? A lot more than what you've got. And and I'm not saying that what's happened has been no big deal. What I am saying is to have them erase that partnership, which would have dramatic consequences and would speak volumes about the companies generally. It would take something unbelievably poisonous. That is not a bridge you can unburn. CM Punk, all right, I guess I can answer one of these, has stated on many occasions his desire to fight more than once, win or lose. With that in mind, do you see the UFC bringing in another Mickey Gall type person for him? And what happens to Mickey Gall post CM Punk? Well, Mickey Gall is a real fighter, so we'll see. They could feed him a number of tough Latin America guys until he gets better and more experience. And if he proves that he can win, he can ascend through the ranks. And if not, they can let him go. So I'm not too worried about that. His path is a little clearer. As for CM Punk, it's the same thing. They can get some guys from tough Latin America, some European prospect or something like that, and make it work. It's not all that serious a challenge. A good question. Is MMA more popular now, or was it more popular in the Lesnar heyday? I would argue it is more popular now. I would argue that it is much more. Now, I mean, he did bigger TV ratings back then. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think generally in terms of being accepted and normalized in sporting life and in popular culture, MMA is as big as it's ever been. This is bigger than the Lesnar era for sure, because you've got not just one powerhouse in Rousey, you've got two with McGregor. And we'll see what happens with them, but you get the idea. Yeah, it's so much different than it used to be. So much different than it used to be. And that was pretty big. And again, I don't know if they're going to match the promotional force that they were able to get for UFC 100 anytime ever. But, it's just sort of instructive. When Liddell retired, what was 2010, he went on Dancing with the Stars. And Liddell was what you would expect a UFC fighter to look like. If you knew nothing about MMA, except that these guys fight in cages, and someone's like, oh, there's going to be a UFC fighter on the show. And you see Liddell, you'd be like, yeah, that looks about right. And then today, who do you got? You got giggly Paige Van Zandt, blonde girl who knows how to dance. It's like a completely different element of MMA. It's a second wave of MMA, but it's more than that. It's that MMA. It's not that the mainstream has come to MMA. Is that MMA has come to the mainstream. I think in particular by opening up to women, it has normalized in many ways. I know people are like, oh, I don't want to see women get hurt. But again, they sent Ronda Rousey to Albany to help lobby, and that was very effective, at least in some capacity. And now you've got Paige Van Zandt. You've got these women ambassadors that help normalize it in ways that, someone like Liddell, for all of his accomplishments and help in the sport, could never really do. Strikeforce, why is there still Strikeforce sectional MMA fighting app? I don't know when the last time that app was updated. I'm not involved with that. Do you guys know something we don't? No. I just don't think anyone has worked on the app. I think it's pretty simple. Okay, let's go to the Twitter machine. It's now 2:16. I messed that up. MMA countdown in ground and pound like boxing has with knockouts. Okay, that's not English. Better fit for endorsement, Jones and Uber, McGregor and Lucky Charms, or Popeyes and DC? Boy. I can't tell if that's racist or not, because I know DC does, in fact, like Popeyes. I'll go with the last one because it's actually a real thing, sort of. Who would win Dancing with the Stars? Me, Ariel, Chuck, Jeff. So the beat. I would clown those fools. Y'all can say what you want, boy. I get up there and show them what time it is. Don't think I won't. You're the big brass. What are you doing next with Conor, Nate, and Jones? Someone says, you were a bit wrong on the Cyborg issue. Using male hormones and whatever else as a female permanently changes. Yes, there is evidence to suggest that if you have taken at any point in your life steroids, that even as you get off of them, you can retain the benefits of them to some capacity over time. Fine. If you would like to ban her from competition and use your argument as such, I would certainly, we can have that debate. But if you're just going to license her and license her as a functioning of testing her, and she's been thoroughly tested since then your argument is irrelevant. All right. What about Burger King and Big Country? I'd be down for it. Again, you're the big brass. What are you doing next with Conor, Nate, and Jones? Think financially. Well, financially, you're putting Conor and Nate back together. Jones, you're going to move him to heavyweight after this one. If McGregor completely dominates Diaz in the rematch, does that kill Diaz's newly found fame? Nope. Makes a third fight. Do you think jiu-jitsu is come back as the most effective art in MMA? No. I think jiu-jitsu has made adaptations over time to maintain a degree of relevancy. I don't think this idea of thinking of things as individual arts is in any way relevant to modern MMA. Let's say Jones is removed. Do you think they just fill in Rumble or remove the fight altogether? G-Bus, I don't know. I suspect they will try to save it, but I really don't know. Still, no big announcements for UFC 200. How are you liking that card so far? Looks pretty solid to me. Yeah, from what we've seen, so we've got like Gastelum versus the Redneck. And I mean that in a nice way. Johnny Hendricks. You've got Velasquez and Brown, and there's been a few other ones that have been attached to it. They all seem quite nice. Who's going to win? Emil Meek or Tanquinho? Remember, Emil has a beard. I don't know if you're going to win, Emil, but I'm rooting for you. Let's see. Luke, if you can afford to drive a white Corvette, why don't you? Because I don't feel the need to like fill a hole in my life through purchasing an automobile that doesn't really do anything extra for me. I got a Honda. I got a Mazda CX-5. It's black. It's 2015. I got it last year. It's nice. It's only got 7,000 miles on it. I don't drive it that much. Your boy can put his dogs in it. I can get groceries. It's, cool enough looking to not look like a dad driving a minivan. I admit it's only one step up from that, but I don't like if I want to. What am I doing with a Corvette? What am I? I'm going to go do. I'm married. I'm going to go chase tail in Georgetown. Come on. On paper, where does UFC 198 rank among the best UFC cards? It's a good one, man. It's a really good one. They stacked that joker. Now, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to like the turmoil in Brazil. The commodities boom is over, and the Petrobras scandal has seemingly wrapped up every conceivable party and politician of note. And that has damaged, faith in their institutions, and certainly their economy has taken a tumble. So I think the UFC realized if we're going to go to Brazil, we gotta hammer them so that people are going to really want to pay for our ticket. And it has resulted in a really heavy card. As a consequence, 200 between that and New York, it's kind of diluted what appears to be where what could have been a really great 200 card, but 200 still might be pretty good. Where do you think Bellator will be 1 year from now? I think they'll be a little bit bigger than they are today. How do you see Brennan Ward versus Evangelista Santos fight going down at Bellator 153? I think Brennan Ward's going to hammer him. Santos doesn't take punishment like he used to. Luke, I am guilty of driving without both my insurance card and registration. It is not too uncommon. Right. Well, first of all, then you're a menace to society. But more than that, do you routinely take it out of your car? Like, who does that? What conceivable purpose would there be day in, day out to just simply take it out of your car? I suppose if you're getting a new one and you haven't put it in your car yet, that's one thing. but it's fairly unlikely or certainly uncommon. I'm certain that it happens. I mean, murder happens every day. It's also relatively uncommon. But this idea that like that's a, well, I just didn't have my registration and proof of insurance. Dude, for what? Like, how do you not have that in your car? How do you sit behind, and especially when you're on probation, how do you not have that? Will I ever see a title bout in the UFC at catchweight? How do you have a title? Well, I guess you could, depending. Like, it could be, you just see that in boxing, right? It'll be in a division, but then the guys will agree to meet at a certain number in that division, and it'll be for a title. I suspect it could happen, just not anytime soon. Please comment on Vitor's new look. I mean, it's Dad Bod City, right? What happens with JDS if he beats Rothwell convincingly? I think he jumps to the front of the queue again. I'm not rooting against JDS. Let me be very clear about that. Nor am I rooting for Rothwell. But there is a part of me that's like, I almost hope that JDS loses because I feel like he's taken such damage that I don't want to see him take anymore. I don't know what to say about that. I think Cote is going to be going. I think Cote is going to surprise people and lay a beating on Cowboy. Thoughts? I certainly wouldn't discount his chances of winning, but putting a beating on Cowboy, that seems deeply unlikely. But I guess we'll see. If Jones remains on UFC 197, are we going to see a Ronda-esque perfect storm of distractions building up to his fight? I don't know. He's had a number of distractions and poor preparation in the past, and it never seemed to affect him. So if anyone can get past this, it's definitely him. However, if I am Daniel Cormier, I'm probably not all that upset necessarily that this has happened to my upcoming opponent. Does McGregor Diaz 2 prove that fighting doesn't prove anything? Used to be a fight was the end to a discussion. No, it still proves any number of different things. It's just that even when it proves something, there is reason to be doubtful that it can happen over and over again. Right? I think that's the issue. True, false. Nick Diaz was right years ago when he said UFC sold wolf tickets and referring to certain title bouts. I suppose, but you shouldn't be confused about them. And they kind of sold wolf tickets in his own fight. I mean, I never thought he had a chance against GSP, and I like Nick Diaz very much. I respect him very much. I think very highly of his abilities. And again, I think like his brother, if you match him up in the right way in big fights, he can have big wins and big performances, and people will find him very deserving. I find him to be a very deserving contender even when he loses. But I just thought that was a bad matchup for him the whole way through, much like I think RDA is a bad matchup for Nate. It's not a fight that makes a lot of sense to me at this point, particularly since they've already competed. Can you imagine how DC would feel if Jones got out of jail, got out of all this trouble and beat him? That's a not unrealistic possibility, too. Someone says, you don't need a Corvette. You're not going through a midlife crisis like most of their client base. Exactly. I'm fine. I do just fine in my in my Mazda CX-5 Sport. CX-5 Sport. Who do you think Zingano was fighting? Ooh, I don't know. Maybe getting a title shot? I don't know. We'll see. Are you prepared for your face to be photoshopped into dancing GIFs or GIFs? Yeah, I don't really care. Could we possibly see Jon Jones as the light heavy and heavyweight champion by the end of the year? We never want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but do I think he's capable of winning that in the calendar year? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. All right, let's get a few more of these in. Someone's asking about Velasquez and Rothwell being different today. I'm not sure if I see it different today. Again, when you see how Velasquez looks when he comes back, but even then, stylistically, it's a bit of a bad matchup. Even if I think Velasquez is a hobbled version of the version he used to be, but we'll see. Someone's asking about Ariel and Fox. I don't really feel comfortable opining about that. Ariel said everything you need to say about that. I mean, what more can reasonably be said? You guys know my feelings on this. I've talked about it for years. So there you go. Cyborg. So it says it's not a step up from her Invicta fights. It's much more of a showcase fight for her in her hometown and country. Yeah, probably. What's wrong with that? I would rather have seen her fight Kat Zingano. Well, if she wins, you might. What do you think her future is in the UFC? I think they're going to make as many fights for her as they can without blowing the bank, and that's it. No more, no less. If they can make fights for her, they will. If they can't, they won't. You know, if they can get willing participants to do it, they will. If they can't, they won't. And that's no more, no less. Luke, what advice would you have for someone who is interested in doing what you do? Don't. What are the pros and cons in this business? Boy, Jesus, how can I answer that question in this kind of thing? I have a video. It's on my YouTube channel. It's on my Facebook page. It's called How to Be an MMA Journalist, and it explains some advice that you would need to get into the business. Long story short, you should bring in real-world expertise from something else into MMA, and you should try to do something that people are not currently doing unless you can do it substantially better. Gentrification of the UFC. That's interesting. If the UFC continues to grow financially, attracting bigger sponsors and more mainstream coverage by media outlets, can you see the gentrification of the UFC? And I'm sure what you mean by that. By which I mean rule changes to protect the new fans from far more obviously brutal aspects of the sport, e.g. ground and pound, much earlier stoppages, more in-round medical checks, sanctions against fighters whose behavior outside the octagon bring in the game into disrepute. I think some of these things you're going to see generally as people become more concerned as as medical evidence becomes more available, as UFC grows more corporate. These are natural things that might happen. I don't know that I would attribute that to what you call the gentrification of bringing in new audiences. Existing audiences might lose some of their palatability for this stuff too as evidence grows. There's a general appetite for violence, yes, but there's an appetite as well for medical and regulatory oversight that I don't think will be either, MMA fans existing don't really have this. This is pressure coming in from a new group. I think it will bleed across these groups generally and have an effect in that way. Luke, higher fight IQ, Jon Jones or Conor McGregor? Jon Jones, I guess, although sometimes he makes bad fight choices. Lower non-fight IQ, Jon Jones or Jason Miller? That would be Jon Jones, because Jason Miller appears to need some medical help. That's not the same as Jon Jones's problem. And there's more. Okay, I'll try to get to these if I can. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and share it if you like it. I really appreciate it. Do me another solid. I have my radio show today. It's about an hour and a half from now. I've got Leslie Smith, I've got John Fitch, and I've got Misha Tate on today. Sirius XM 93, Luke Thomas Show. Check that out. I really appreciate it. You can give us a nice review on iTunes. You can do all kinds of cool stuff and be a great American, and I would really appreciate it. So thank you so much for watching. I don't know what else to say except, yeah, thanks, guys. Oh, and if you're going to be on my radio show, I guess I will talk to you in about an hour and a half. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time, stay frosty.